Into the latest of the CoGo Good Impact series. My name is Mike Barry. I'm an advisor to CoGo, 19 years leading the sustainability journey at Marks & Spencer. Loved it to bits. Now look, what we're doing with this Good Impact series is exploring the very essence of how business does business. We want to encourage business to put social and environmental performance right at the very heart of what it does. And boy, do we need it. We have a climate crisis, we have an inequality crisis, a pandemic. How does business respond and put itself on a footing to build back better into the future? Now, CoGo is a great app. It puts you in control of your daily expenditure, making sure that you're putting your money towards businesses that really make a positive difference. Businesses that are committed to cutting their carbon footprint, businesses that are committed to paying the real living wage. If you want to find them, they're on CoGo. Please do look it up. Now, in previous episodes of the Good Impact series, we've looked at a couple of things. We've looked at sectors. We've looked at the fashion sector and really explored how it can reduce its social environmental footprint, change away from single-use throwaway fashion to something much more sustainable. We've also worked with Mike Berners-Lee to look at an issue that cuts right across the economy, carbon footprinting, a great environmental issue that matters to us all. But today we want to do something similar for the living wage, and again, an issue that cuts right across, horizontally across the economy, and can transform the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Now, the living wage has always been an issue. For way too long, hundreds of thousands of people, despite all their hard personal work every day of their lives, don't receive enough money to actually support the basics in their lives. Feed the children, educate the children, heat the home, or buy the most basic of white goods, a washing machine, a fridge and a cooker. The Living Wage Foundation has been set up over the last 15 years to actually transform the approach that we have to wages, making sure that businesses put their people and how they're paid at the very heart of everything they do. But the pandemic is here. And what does the pandemic mean for the living wage? Well, we're going to be exploring that in the next 30 minutes or so. But let's be very clear, as the pandemic plunges hundreds of thousands of people into unemployment and into poverty, it's never been more important that we support the most vulnerable in society and pay them a decent salary. Now, what I've seen in the last few months has been interesting. Despite the pandemic, I've seen lots of business commitments on environment, commitments to be net zero, to be 100% circular, to only use sustainable raw materials. And that's brilliant. That's really ambitious. But when I look at social sustainability, I struggle a little bit more. Most businesses define social sustainability in terms of risk management. No workers killed on a building site today. No kids in the factory, no food customers poisoned because of our food. Is that really what we want from the businesses that we shop with? I think we want more. We want social ambition. And again, the Living Wage Foundation have been right at the heart of giving business a tool to demonstrate they're absolutely committed to individuals, communities, and society. So this week is Living Wage Week, an annual celebration of all that is good about paying the living wage, and also when we set a new living wage level in London and across the UK. So I'm delighted today to be joined by Jess Goebbel from the Living Wage Foundation. She's going to share the story behind the living wage, the benefits it brings to individuals and to businesses as well. Jess, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
And look, I know it's been a very, very busy day, a very, very busy week for you. So really appreciate you fitting in some time for us. But I want to start right at the beginning for our listeners and just tell us the basic. What is the living wage?
Sure. So the real living wage is kind of a Ronseal concept in that it does exactly what it says in the tin. It's a wage that actually matches what people need in order to have a decent standard of living. So it means that all workers who earn it can meet their everyday needs. That might be the weekly shop, it might be an emergency dentist trip, but it's also being able to buy like a present for your kid to take to their friend's birthday party. Little things like that that really make sure that people earning it can kind of take part in their family and social kind of community life as well. And I guess we've got to also say what the rates are. So we've announced this week as part of Living Wage Week that the new UK rate, so that covers all of the UK apart from London specifically. So the UK rate is now £9.50 and the London rate that was announced this week is £10.85.
Yes, thank you. And again, transformative, but help us all understand, why do we need this? Surely, in 2020, we're not in Victorian times now. Surely everybody should be getting a decent wage for what they do. What's the problem?
Well, yeah, you'd hope so and you'd think so, but sadly, that is not the case. So approximately 1 in 5 workers earn less than the real living wage, and that equates to around 5 million people across the UK. So and these people also tend to be in insecure work, so that that also covers things like looking at how many hours they're getting, the consistency of those hours, and also when they actually find out about them. We also know that BAME people and women are more likely to be in these kind of low pay jobs, and also, I guess, really pertinent to the pandemic, 1 in 4 key workers is also earning less than the real living wage. So that includes people like care workers, porters in the NHS, security staff, and also supermarket staff. And we also find that the people being paid less than the real living wage is really concentrated in specific industries, so hospitality, retail, and again, cleaning and health and social care.
Jess, I mean, 5 million people. It's not just 5 million workers, it's their dependents as well. So I'm going to make a very, very crude sum and multiply that through maybe 15 million people in total depend upon that wage coming in through the door. And yet in 2020, we can't pay people enough money to support them in terms of the basics. So look, I know at times it can be quite contentious. What is a living wage? Where do we set it? Is it £9 an hour, £10, £11, etc.? What's the process you follow to try and set it each year to give businesses certainty to know what's coming and it's based upon some facts and some figures?
Definitely. So the actual kind of calculation process starts pretty much as soon as we release the new rates. The rates start off with speaking to people who to find out exactly what they need in order to have that kind of decent standard of living. We speak to lots of different kind of family types. It's based on the minimum income standard, which involves speaking to loads of different family types to find out what they need to put in that kind of basket of goods and services that they need in order to have that standard of living. We then pull out some of the bigger ticket items, like specifically for London, like housing, like transport, like childcare, and also council tax. That all gets fed into a quite impressive set of different kind of codes and spreadsheets by the Resolution Foundation, who actually calculate the rates, and it comes out the other end with the specific rates. But we also, I guess, to kind of smooth the process and make sure they've got oversight of the rates, we also have the Living Wage Commission, which is made up of kind of experts in the field of these kind of like kind of economic wage related wage related work. But we also have people from trade unions. So Francis O'Grady is on the commission, and we also have employers. So we have big employers like Nationwide on the commission, down to SMEs. So we've got an SME in Scotland that works with is on the Living Wage Commission, and they're there to basically see if what the Resolution Foundation is suggesting is kind of works with the kind of making sure that the rates stay, the increase of the rates isn't completely volatile, so it doesn't go up 1 year loads and then stay flat for a couple of years. So they're there to also kind of have that extra step to reassure businesses that the rates are actually really robust and actually do match what people need to have to live on.
And that's really important. I know, having worked in business myself, how tough things can be, in particular at this moment in time. Lots of businesses really worrying about whether they're going to survive the next 6 to 12 months. So knowing that there's good governance behind this, and there's an algorithm behind it, and that there are people constantly checking, I think it's important to a lot of business leaders, which we'll explore in a moment. But just help me understand right now, how many companies in Britain are actually paying the real living wage?
So we are, annoyingly, for considering it's Living Wage Week, nearly on 7,000 employers across the UK. So I think actually we're probably going to hit 7,000 during Living Wage Week, which is even like a bigger celebration than we started off the week with. But in terms of the kind of the specific kind of people impact of that actually equates to an uplift, I guess today or this week for over 250,000 workers who are employed by these living wage employers. And I guess also it's really important to mention now that we've actually had over 800 employers join as a living wage employer since the beginning of the pandemic. So it's not just a kind of movement that has been hit by the pandemic is now kind of over or is struggling. It's actually kind of going from strength to strength, kind of maybe in spite of the pandemic as well.
Yeah, and that's heartening to hear, because I mean, inevitably, I suspect a few have dropped by the wayside. It will always be that a few businesses struggle through any particular sort of moment in time. But to know that 800 companies, more than 10% of your current membership have stepped forward, even at this most difficult of times, I think says something about that level of ambition that was challenging business to do a little bit earlier. So that's the basics of the living wage. But it's very easy to have a theoretical discussion here. I think this is a very human story. And I think we missed the humanity of it. We've talked in numbers of 5 million workers and 250,000 people have seen their wages go up. But just give me a few examples of some real life case studies, some real life people that this has actually transformed their life.
Absolutely. I guess the best thing about the living wage is that actually the people that are in receipt of the living wage and the people that actually pay it are our best advocates. So I think when we speak to them, we have them kind of speak at our events. But I guess the really important thing about the living wage is that the movement itself started with kind of people wanting to make a difference to their lives and their kind of families' lives and also their communities' lives. And that kind of hinged on people standing up and kind of asking the question to big business. So the living wage movement started in East London in 2001. And sort of by the mid 2000s, the kind of the movement had grown. We were actually kind of asking businesses to pay it. And I think one of the kind of the key moments in living wage history, to put it kind of in a kind of grand sense, is when someone called Abdul Durant, who was a cleaner at HSBC, stood up at an AGM and asked the chairman, like, can you pay the living wage? We work in the same office, we work in the same space, but we don't share the same kind of life. And actually HSBC now are a living wage employer. They've been a living wage employer for quite a number of years now. So it's kind of like that narrative of people making the difference kind of is where the living wage movement started with. We now see we've got a brilliant cleaner who works at Aviva's office in Norwich, Lynn. She's an absolute diamond. But she kind of tells the story of how she like the effect that getting paid the living wage has had on her life. So she has care of her granddaughter, and she was saying one of the things that was that made the biggest difference was just being able to like take her granddaughter out for kind of treats. So can I go to McDonald's? Yes, we can go tonight, because it actually have kind of money to make it through to the end of the month. But it also has it's also made a real impact on her granddaughter's life as well as hers. So she was able to buy a laptop for her granddaughter to be able to do her GCSE kind of coursework at home rather than having to wait around at school. So that's had a kind of real impact on her granddaughter's kind of future aspirations by making sure that she can actually study in a kind of at her home rather than having to spend time elsewhere. But it also has real impact on people. So one of the really great stories that we heard from someone who works for Cook, the food retailer, at last year's London launch actually. Melissa is a chef at one of the Cook kitchens, and she was saying that she grew up in care. She never felt like she had a home, and earning the living wage meant that she could actually kind of take ownership of her kind of home life. And it was the first time, because of the living wage, that she'd actually felt like she'd had a home, like her own space. So it's those kind of really impactful stories that we hear kind of time and time and again from so many people, that just, I guess, working for a living wage employer means that they realise that their time is respected when they're at work, but they also have time outside of work to enjoy life. And I guess on the flip side of that, we also hear stories of people that aren't earning the living wage. Not being able to spend time with their kids, working 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs, not being able to be there to read like a bedtime story for their children. It really has that kind of really stark impact on people's lives, and having that small change of increasing wages to those kind of lowest paid staff in your workplace actually has such a huge impact and makes a huge difference for them.
And I love those stories. The story of Abdul standing up at an AGM amongst all these men who look like me, white, grey heads in a suit, saying this is about fairness, this is about equality. Melissa sort of having a pathway in her life of self-confidence, a sense of self-worth. And Lynn being able to sort of bring a granddaughter up and help her reach her potential as well. So again, I want everybody listening to this to remember the humanity of the difference that this makes. It's not just about big numbers, 250,000 of this and 5 million of this and £10.85 per hour. It's about real lives, real human beings, and transforming their lives. So tell me a little bit about the organisations signing up to it. Because again, if I had a couple of other business people with here, I'd have somebody on my shoulder saying, but Mike, it's tough. Don't you understand how competitive the marketplace is? You come from a retail background, you must understand how cutthroat it is. You can't afford to pay people much more. Just tell me about why businesses are stepping forward and doing this beyond the morality of it. What's the business case for action?
Yeah, definitely. I think we have spoken to our network. We worked with Cardiff Business School to do a survey of all of our network a couple of years ago. We're actually going to redo it over the next year. But we've, as part of that, we also found not only does it have paying the living wage have a really kind of powerful impact on the people themselves, but it also has a really good impact on the business. So 9 out of 10 of the businesses who are the organisations that are in our network actually found that they had paying the living wage and being accredited had a really positive impact on their staff. And that kind of ranged from things that I guess are really helpful in that kind of competitive market, improving your reputation amongst peers, but also amongst the public, down to also things like with your staff, like increasing motivation. Retaining staff, I think, is, especially thinking about retail, that is such an important thing. Like, think about how much money you spend on recruitment each year because you've got a turnover of staff, there's absenteeism. The living wage can help improve those KPIs. So you actually are seeing you're spending less money and having to spend less time on that as well. I guess one of the really great examples of that would be Brewdog, the kind of high street pub chain. They put the living wage at the heart of their business quite early on. So they've kind of grown up with the living wage, and they've expanded like hugely over the last couple of years, which is obviously really fantastic, especially when you can sort of walk past me like, living wage is going to go in there. And they basically, when they implemented the living wage, they made it part of a bigger process. So they wanted to understand how they could better reward but also engage their staff. So they as well as kind of implementing the living wage, they also simplified their pay structures. So that had a kind of a big impact on their immediate costs, thinking about how much they were spending on actual wages. But they also, alongside that, abolished 0-hour contracts, and they made a kind of guaranteed hours pledge as part of that kind of big packet of change. And they also made sure that they were training and developing staff in-house to make sure that they could progress through the organisation. And I guess the upshot of that was that they had they saw a drop in turnover of 40% in terms of their staff, not in terms of that money turnover. Should point that out, which was obviously like had a huge impact on their on their kind of recruitment costs. They also moved their internal promotion from around 40% of staff up to 80% of staff, which means that you're retaining and also kind of testament to the fact that they were training their staff. That really makes a difference in terms of the quality of service that you can then offer, because someone's been in the business for years, as opposed to sort of popping in at a kind of one level and then kind of dropping back out again. And they actually, in terms of the material recruitment costs, they actually saw a really big drop in the first year. So they went, I think it was from £130,000 of their recruitment costs from one year to 10,000 in the next, which is a huge difference. And if you think that sort of, it starts paying for itself essentially, which is really fantastic. But I guess also thinking about a couple of the businesses that spoke at our London event this week, Roslyn Coffee and Handlebars, who are a bike repair company in London. And they're kind of both, we've had one of the founders speaking at the events and at the event this week, and both of them really underlined the fact that it was paying the staff wasn't to necessarily motivate their staff. It was actually to to make sure that those staff understood that they were valued and that they were respected and their time and skills were respected. And that was kind of the foundation of why they paid the living wage, rather than any kind of like rather than the kind of increasing staff motivation being the driving factor. But obviously then the staff motivation came anyway. So it was it's sort of a win-win when you look at it like that, which is definitely really impactful, from kind of huge businesses that are kind of on quite a lot of high streets like Brewdog, down to these smaller organizations, these SMEs that are still making that huge impact, even in these kind of lower paying industries like hospitality and retail.
And I love that story again. It's like the conversation we've just had about there's a human dimension to it, and then there's a big societal bit. There's a business case in a functional sense, but then there's this very human case that just says people feeling more engaged with their employer if they're treated with respect. And of course, they're delighted that they're walking out there with more money in their wage packet, but fundamentally, they're being treated as a human being that's valued. And that's incredibly powerful. So we start to sort of pick out, Jess, a little bit of a business case there in terms of business interacting with their customers, or what call them consumers, the citizens that happen to buy services or products from HSBC or Nationwide or the local coffee shop. What do we know about what they're saying about how they feel about buying from a living wage employer? And do enough people know that when they're buying from somebody, that is a living wage company or not?
Yeah, well, I think it's always a bit of a battle, especially when we've got the national living wage, which is the government's minimum for over 25, is obviously separate to our living wage. Citizens UK, who is the organisation that actually started the living wage campaign, they're releasing some public polling this week that would suggest that actually people are really supportive of people receiving the living wage, especially kind of key workers. So thinking about retail staff specifically within this kind of this kind of environment. But we also know, as a result of the pandemic, that the way people shop has changed quite dramatically, and obviously that is kind of on the kind of macro level, moving to kind of online as opposed to kind of going to your local high street or kind of buying from a kind of shopping centre or something like that, where you have got these big chains there. But it also is thinking about kind of what behaviours people will carry on doing. I guess it's sort of the behaviours that stick. And one of the things that is that's made a real difference and people are starting to do now is being more likely to buy from companies who have treated the customers really well, but also have treated their staff really well throughout the pandemic, buying from kind of ethical brands that they want to that are kind of been seen to do the right thing. And also it also has a little bit of the kind of community-based shopping thing as well, in terms of people wanting to shop in their kind of local high street with independent and small retailers, which I guess also kind of plays really nicely into the sort of the living wage narrative, because over 80% of our businesses who are accredited are SMEs. And I guess like the other way that people can, and we know people have found out about living wage businesses is via apps like CoGo. So people are encouraged to kind of change their behaviour to shop more ethically, whether that's kind of for environmental reasons or these kind of, or living wage and so other social reasons. And I guess that also makes it the process of picking those businesses really simple. And I guess it's sort of all of those things together make it kind of more, makes the kind of living wage case for kind of high street retailers a little bit more kind of little bit more clear, I guess. But it is, I guess we've still got a long way to go to make sure that everyone kind of knows what the living wage means, but we shall keep trying. And I guess as the movement grows, even through the pandemic, as the movement grows, people have become more, we've definitely seen on our kind of social channels, people are interacting more with our living wage employers. So it is, it's definitely something that is changing, and I guess it's quite rapidly as well. So just making sure that living wage employers know to shout about the fact that they are accredited, because we know that that's what people are looking for, is also really important.
Yeah. And there's definitely a trend, I think, towards this concept of build back better. I mean, people have been shocked and hugely impacted by the pandemic, but it's made people rethink their lives. Do I want to be rushing around like a headless chicken chasing all this consumerism, or do I want to buy more locally, more slowly, from businesses that actually treat people with humanity and dignity as well? So let's only hope that grows. But let's also be honest with ourselves that you're helping several 100,000 people now, but we've still got 5 million people out there not getting the benefit of the real living wage. How do we close the gap? I mean, what's the vision of the foundation of the next 5 years to substantially grow and make sure that everybody in the UK is receiving that proper salary for the hard work they do?
Definitely. I think it's obviously, I think it goes without saying that obviously it's a really difficult time at the moment for businesses. There's kind of, remember Brexit? That's coming up apparently. But there's also the kind of that sort of lingering uncertainty in the next couple of months, even after kind of the golden quarter, which is, I guess, slightly less golden now because we've got lockdown across England. Wales have just had lockdown. So I think it is really important to recognize that it is difficult for businesses, but making that kind of investment in your staff's time, as we've seen with some of the businesses that I've spoken about earlier, like Roslyn, like Handlebars, like Cook, actually kind of pays in dividends when you sort of come the other side of the pandemic, when we fingers crossed get to the other side of the pandemic. But we're also thinking about what we can do kind of outside just the living wage, and what actually will make kind of increase the impact of the living wage in the UK. So thinking about we've just launched a new scheme that Aviva and Standard Life Aberdeen are the first people to sign up to. It's called Living Hours. So that's looking at the insecurity of hours, so making sure that people have enough hours, that their contract actually reflects the hours that they're always working. And also that they have kind of a guaranteed notice period for those shifts, which actually, again, helps people plan ahead and can help them kind of save money in the long run, because they're not having to book in an emergency babysitter because they've suddenly got this shift come up. And so it actually means that they are kind of being able to build that future for themselves, because they can rely on the work and also the wage that they're going to be getting. We're also thinking about how we can kind of roll out the model, because I guess one of the things that we know is that the living wage movement in the UK is the most successful living wage movement across the world. So understanding how we can use the learnings that we have from the movement here to help other countries kind of build that movement as well, because I guess that's one of the things that we definitely see is that when we're thinking about kind of global living wages, the question always is, well, what is it in X country, what is it in Y country, and how do we know that that rate is reliable? So that's another thing that we're looking at kind of rolling out across as a kind of global movement. And I guess all of those kind of additional things that we are doing helps to build the living wage movement in the UK, because we are constantly learning from what we are from those other schemes, how we can make the living wage movement in the UK better and stronger. And I guess one of the things that also is really important to recognize is that what we've been doing so far has really been working. It has made a huge impact on people's lives. We know that there's kind of 250,000 people that are getting a pay rise this week, but there's also the kind of the pressure from that movement on wages across the UK. So thinking about the kind of the organisations, I won't mention them by name, the organisations that are kind of pegging to the rates, that are using our rates as what they should be paying, even if they don't accredit. So there is, whilst there's the kind of the immediate effects of the living wage on living wage employers and their staff, there's also that kind of butterfly effect of what people are then thinking about what they need to actually pay their staff, even if they're not accredited, just to make sure that they are kind of understanding to make sure that they are kind of getting staff and retaining staff in the same way. That I guess is something that's kind of immeasurable for us, but does actually have a huge impact.
And two additional thoughts on this scale question. I mean, one is big corporates and their supply chains. We'll initially focus on the UK, but clearly they've got global supply chains as well. So are businesses driving the living wage beyond just their own operations and down into their suppliers? And secondly, does business lend its voice enough in the corridors of power when it's lobbying government for change? Are these big corporate leaders standing next to you saying, we think this is a good thing, here's the evidence, we think you should do more across the economy with it?
Yeah, so in terms of the first question, yes, it does include the supply chain where you're being provided with the service. So in order to actually get accredited as a living wage employee, you have to pay all of your directly employed staff the living wage, and then have a plan in place for all of your regular third-party staff. So if they're not already getting paid the living wage, we'd expect you to move those contracts where legally possible. Obviously, you can't break a contract in the middle. To move them to the living wage over time, and that the process is usually complete for most organizations within kind of 1 to 2 years. So that kind of, it does cover supply chain immediately, but then we also think about some of the organizations that have been accredited for a while, that are thinking about how far else they can push it through their supply chain, even if that supply chain is providing them with goods rather than a service. So someone like KPMG, they've been accredited almost since the beginning of the movement. They were, again, there's a brilliant story of people, the reason they got accredited and had started to have those conversations about living wage is because Citizens UK campaigners turned up outside the offices with a cup of tea and biscuits and eventually got invited in by people in KPMG to have the conversation about living wage, and that's what actually kick-started the movement in I think it was Mike Kelly that invited them in, who was quite high up in KPMG back then. And yeah, it's such a brilliant story of just that kind of having that kind of small gesture, I guess at the beginning actually has made them into these kind of living wage champions that they are now. But one of the things that they do with their supply chain is that they have events where they invite their whole supply chain to come and learn about what best practice is for them. And then one of those things that's kind of key to that is living wage. So kind of discussing ways with their supply chain, even if they aren't immediately affected by the living wage accreditation, to think about how they can also push it within their business, but also their supply chain as well, is also a really important thing that big businesses can do, and obviously have the power to do, I guess, is also the other thing. And then in terms of your second question, I think it would be one of the things, I guess, that we do as an organisation is we work with businesses who want to do the right thing to pay their staff enough to live on, to pay their staff enough to meet their everyday needs, and who also don't want to wait for kind of government policy to catch up. And obviously government policy has kind of nearly caught up, although we'll see what happens next year. But it is again, it's also that kind of testament to the fact that the movement has kind of pushed policy to change, and that's not something that we do, but obviously it's something that big businesses can do. And I guess it's just having that kind of strength of the movement has actually pushed government policy to increase wages, I guess the fastest they've ever increased in terms of the minimum wage. So it's definitely having an effect, whether that's because of the movement itself, whether it's big business kind of saying it's the right thing to do. I think it is it's still really powerful, the fact that the minimum wage has increased so rapidly over the last few years.
Thank you. And just a final question. We're in the living wage week now. You know, we've announced at the start of the week what the new wage rates are. What else can we expect to see this week?
Well, obviously we've had events. We've had a couple today, so one in London, one in I guess the Northwest. It's really weird because obviously they've all been online, so it's not actually been in anywhere. We've got events throughout the week, so thinking about not only kind of geographically, but also in terms of sectors and so thinking about, and also kind of themed based kind of events. So we're also one of the things that we launched a couple of years ago was living wage places. So we've got a living wage places event that's looking at how kind of places and people who are accredited in that particular place can increase coverage by working together to encourage more people to pay the living wage. So I guess go on our website, look at the events that are on there, and if you want to join one, just drop us an email or sign up via the link. I guess that's kind of the immediate thing. Also go to our social media. We've got so many brilliant things that are happening this week. I think we had Martin Lewis talking about explaining the rates, which is really fantastic. There's also a brilliant video from a group of a school in Newham in East London, St Anthony's Primary School, who have done this is now their third song that they've done as part of their kind of campaigning work for the living wage. They're like unbelievable. Definitely like go and have a look at their website at their YouTube. I think they've also got it on Bandcamp, so you can buy it as well. Very exciting. But they their campaign work has actually moved people like City Airport to get accredited. They've also today or this week we announced Tate and Lyle Sugars as getting accredited as well. They were instrumental in encouraging Tate and Lyle Sugars to get accredited as well. So yeah, there's loads on our social media to kind of understand more about the kind of history of the campaign and what the living wage does, but also to learn a little bit more about the kind of the impact that it has on people who earn it, but also on the people that are kind of campaigning for it, and kind of recognize the kind of work that they've done that's really been instrumental in kind of uplifting people to the living wage in their communities. And then in terms of, I guess, customers and people that I guess we all buy stuff. If you wanted to support living wage businesses, obviously great way to find living wage businesses is to go on CoGo. We also have a map on our website, so you can see local businesses, even if they're not necessarily kind of ones that you want to buy kind of goods or services from, but they're also just to see who's in your area, who you can kind of support. We also, if you're kind of thinking about Christmas, I guess, is coming up, even though it doesn't feel like a real Christmas at the moment. So we've got a living wage gift guide coming out, so you can think about who you can buy from within that. I think we've had over 120 people put in products this year, which is amazing. And like really exciting, the fact that there's so much kind of energy and people really want to kind of make the most of Christmas, even if we're sort of approaching it in a very weird way. And then I guess if you're thinking about how you can encourage your the places that you shop in to pay the living wage, I guess like maybe just go and ask, especially if it's like a smaller shop, a local shop that you know kind of is if you know the person who owns the shop is going to be there, like why not go in and ask, like, do you pay the living wage? Like, I know it's a bit of a kind of strange question to ask people, but it does actually have an impact on kind of the shops that people on the shop. I think there's a shop around the corner from our office that, remember we used to go to offices that saw our lanyards and like, oh, what's the living wage? And like, we told him what it is, and he was like, oh great, we'll sign up, we already pay it, so it's really fantastic. And I was just like, great, done. So it is obviously like worth asking. And I guess also look out for the logo. You really can't miss it. I think I've got one on my living wage keep cup, but yeah, that logo, you cannot miss it. It's so bright. So if you're trotting down your high street and you see it, you'll know that it's a living wage employer, because you really cannot miss those like clashing cyan and orange colors. And I guess like the final thing I would say is, if there are any businesses listening, think about what the living wage can do for your business. Think about what it can do for your staff, and think about what it can do for your kind of wider the kind of the society that surrounds your shops, that surrounds the high street that you're in, that surrounds that your staff are part of. It really can make a huge difference to not just like one person that's kind of at the receiving end of the living wage, but also their family, their friends. That kind of additional impact of the living wage is really kind of immeasurable. And I guess it sort of goes back to the beginning of the campaign and the movement, that it started because people were not spending enough time with their families, with their communities, and getting paid the living wage has given that back to them. And I guess it's sort of that beautiful kind of full circle moment where actually the thing that people wanted, because the mechanism that people use to kind of get their time back, the living wage, making sure they were getting paid enough for the hours that they could work, so they could only work one shift, to work one job every day. That really has kind of paid dividends, has brought that kind of full circle thing back, so that everyone in receipt of the living wage can actually spend time with their families and embrace that kind of community life that I think we've all sort of embraced over the last 6 to 9 months. So yeah, it is, if you are thinking about paying the living wage, get in touch with us. We'll be happy to help.
Jess, powerful call to arms. And look, thank you for so much, being so generous with your time. It's such a busy week for you. And look, what I take from it is 5 things. One is a small number of brave people 20 years ago changed the direction of this country, because they stood up, They challenge big business, they challenge government, but they brought a positive solution to the table as well. The second thing is you've built the governance system around this to enable many businesses to step in and participate because they know with certainty that how it's going to be calculated and how it's going to grow. The third thing is the multiplier effect. What you've gained, you're using business to drive it down their supply chain, to encourage other businesses to take part, to lobby policymakers to sort of drive up wages across the whole UK economy. That's brilliant. The fourth thing is we as individuals, as citizens, can make a difference too. We talked about CoGo, we talked about your website helping identify people who are actually paying the living wage. Back them, buy your stuff from them. Love the idea about the gift catalogue at Christmas as well. It's coming, use your money wisely. But I want to save the final word for Abdul, Melissa and Lynn, human beings whose lives have been transformed. And that's just 3 people that we've heard about. There are hundreds and thousands of human stories behind this. And what you've done, Jess, and the Living Wage Foundation more broadly, is enable all those people to reach their potential. It's an incredibly heartwarming, emotional story in a world that's quite turbulent and tough at times at the moment. So, Jess, thank you. Good luck with the rest